My name's Emma Mitchell, 32. And a week ago, I was sitting alone in my apartment, staring at my sister Jessica's wedding invitation that was never meant for me. The envelope had been mistakenly delivered by their wedding planner, a rare slip-up in Jessica's otherwise perfectly controlled life. As I traced my finger over the elegant script that announced her destination wedding in Tuscany, something inside me finally broke. If my own sister couldn't see my worth, I'd have to find it myself. Before I tell you how I turned heartbreak into the most magical week of my life, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you've ever had to create your own happy ending when others tried to write you out of the story. Family is supposed to be your first love, your first friendship, your first loyalty. But for as long as I can remember, my relationship with my sister Jessica has been complicated, at best, painful, at worst. We're less than 2 years apart in age, but the emotional distance between us has always felt like a vast canyon I could never quite bridge. Growing up in our upper middle class suburb of Boston, Jessica was the golden child homecoming queen valedictorian and our parents' obvious favorite. I was the artistic one more interested in photography and creative writing than the pre-law track my parents had hoped we'd both pursue. My sister excelled at meeting expectations. I excelled at creating my own path. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the soundtrack of my childhood, a constant reminder that in my parents' eyes, I was always falling short. Despite this, I tried desperately to maintain a connection with Jessica. When she got accepted to Harvard, I organized a surprise celebration dinner. When she landed her first corporate job, I sent a custom gift basket to her office. When she started dating Andrew, now her fiancé, I made genuine efforts to get to know him and welcome him to our family. But something shifted about 5 years ago. Jessica's success in her investment banking career seemed to accelerate the distance between us. Our occasional sister brunches became increasingly rare, then stopped altogether. My calls went to voicemail, my texts received brief perfunctory responses days later. I told myself she was just busy 70-hour work weeks business trips, and her relationship with Andrew understandably took priority. Then came the holidays 2 years ago. At our family's traditional Christmas Eve dinner, Jessica announced her engagement, proudly displaying a dazzling diamond ring. Everyone erupted in celebration, everyone except me. I wasn't celebrating because I had already seen that ring 3 weeks earlier, when our mother excitedly showed me photos of Jessica and Andrew ring shopping. Everyone in the family had known about the impending engagement, except me. When I congratulated them and asked innocently when the proposal had happened, Jessica exchanged a look with our mother before replying, "Just last night." It was a small lie, but it confirmed what I had suspected. I was deliberately being kept at arm's length from the important moments of my sister's life. Still, I maintained hope. Family is family, I reasoned. Whatever issues existed between us could surely be resolved with time and effort. I sent thoughtful engagement gifts and offered to help with wedding planning, drawing on my experience as a freelance travel writer and photographer who had covered destination weddings across Europe. "Thanks, but we've hired professionals," was Jessica's curt response delivered via text message. I tried to arrange dinners, suggested sister spa days, even proposed a weekend trip to reconnect before she got too deep into wedding planning. Each attempt was met with excuses, cancellations, or outright silence. Our parents, who had always favored Jessica's achievements over my more creative pursuits, seemed oblivious to the growing rift, or perhaps they simply chose not to acknowledge it. Mom would deflect with comments like, "You know how busy Jessica is," or "Wedding planning is so stressful, give her space." Dad would simply change the subject entirely. Throughout this period, I kept most of my heartache to myself. My best friend Mia saw glimpses of it, especially on the rare occasions when Jessica would post family gatherings on social media events I hadn't been invited to. My therapist, Dr. Levine, heard more, helping me process the confusing mix of love, jealousy, hurt, and hope that characterized my feelings toward my sister. Family dynamics established in childhood often persist into adulthood, unless there's intentional work to change them, Dr. Levine explained during one particularly tearful session. And that work has to come from both sides. I was willing to do the work. I just wasn't sure if Jessica was. Then came the moment that would ultimately change everything. I returned home from a 2-week assignment in Morocco, exhausted but exhilarated, after writing a feature on traditional craftsmanship for a travel magazine. Among the stack of mail awaiting me was a thick cream envelope with Italian postage, elegant, expensive-looking, addressed to the Andersons, who lived in the apartment below mine. It was obviously a mistake, so I took it downstairs immediately. Mrs. Anderson opened it in front of me, her eyes widening. "Oh my, it's an invitation to a wedding in Tuscany," she exclaimed. Then her expression changed to confusion. "But we barely know the Clarks. We met them once at a neighborhood function." The Clarks, my sister's future in-laws. My stomach dropped as Mrs. Anderson showed me the invitation. There it was, in elegant calligraphy. "Jessica Mitchell and Andrew Clark cordially invite you to celebrate their union at Villa Monteverdi in Tuscany, Italy." The date was just 6 weeks away. I maintained my composure, somehow congratulating Mrs. Anderson on receiving such a prestigious invitation, explaining that Jessica was my sister, and assuring her that mix-ups happen with international mail. Back in my apartment, the truth crashed down on me like a physical weight. My own sister was getting married in Tuscany, my absolute favorite place in the world, the subject of my first published travel piece, and I hadn't been invited. Not only had I not been invited, but she had invited neighbors she barely knew instead of her own sister. This wasn't oversight. This wasn't being too busy. This was deliberate exclusion. I called my mother immediately, my voice trembling. "Is Jessica really getting married in 6 weeks in Tuscany?" The long pause told me everything before she even spoke. "Emma, honey, Jessica wanted a very small, intimate wedding. Just immediate family and a few close friends." "I am immediate family," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "You know what I mean," she replied awkwardly. "Just us and Andrew's parents and their closest friends from work and college. And the Andersons from my building, apparently," I added bitterly. Another uncomfortable pause. There have been some last-minute changes to the guest list. Jessica and Andrew received a discount if they reached a certain number of guests, so they added a few colleagues and neighbors. The reality was undeniable. My sister would rather invite near strangers to her wedding than include me. When I hung up the phone, I sat in stunned silence for hours, staring at the wall of my apartment as night fell. By morning, something had shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, a hollow ache in my chest, but alongside it grew a new feeling: determination. If my sister didn't want me at her Italian fairy tale, I would create my own. The revelation about Jessica's wedding hit me like a physical blow. For years, I'd made excuses for her behavior, convincing myself that our relationship was simply going through a rough patch that would eventually smooth itself out. But this deliberate exclusion from one of the most important days of her life, while including neighbors she barely knew, shattered any illusions I had been clinging to. That night, I cycled through every painful emotion in the book. Hurt so acute it felt like my chest was being crushed. Anger that burned hot and bright, making my hands shake as I paced my small apartment. Confusion that left me dizzy, re-examining every interaction we'd had over the past few years, looking for the moment where things had gone so terribly wrong. And finally, a devastating sense of rejection that cut to the core of who I was. Was I really such a terrible sister? I whispered to my empty living room, tears streaming down my face. Am I really so unlovable that my own sister would rather invite strangers than have me there? I called Mia at midnight, not caring about the late hour. She answered immediately, as if she'd been waiting for my call. "I found out about Jessica's wedding," I said, my voice breaking. "It's in Tuscany, in 6 weeks. I wasn't invited." "Oh, Emma," she breathed. "I'm coming over." 20 minutes later, Mia was at my door with a bottle of wine and takeout from our favorite Thai place. I barely touched the food, but the wine and Mia's unwavering support helped dull the sharp edges of my pain. "I don't understand," I said, curled up on my couch. "What did I do to deserve this? I've always tried so hard with her." Mia's expression was a mixture of sympathy and barely concealed anger. "This isn't about you, Emma. This is about Jessica and whatever issues she's carrying. You've been nothing but supportive and loving." "Then why would she do this?" Mia hesitated before answering. "I've watched you bend over backward for years, trying to maintain a relationship with someone who consistently shows you that she doesn't value you the same way. Maybe the question isn't what you did wrong, but why you keep expecting different results from someone who has shown you exactly who they are." Her words hit me like a splash of cold water. Had I been so desperate for my sister's approval that I'd ignored all evidence that she simply didn't want a relationship with me? The next morning, with a clearer head, but an equally heavy heart, I called Dr. Levine and scheduled an emergency session. In her calm, sunlit office, I poured out the whole story. I feel like such a fool, I concluded, wiping away tears. All these years I've been chasing a relationship that apparently only exists in my head. Dr. Levine leaned forward slightly. Emma, I want you to consider something. The pain you're feeling right now is real and valid, but it's also an opportunity. An opportunity for what more rejection? An opportunity to finally put yourself first. You've spent years trying to earn your sister's approval and affection. What would happen if you redirected all that energy toward your own happiness? I stared at her, the concept simultaneously obvious and revolutionary. Your sister has made her choice, Dr. Levine continued gently. You can't control that, but you can control how you respond. Will you continue to let her choices define your worth, or will you define it for yourself? That question followed me home, echoing in my mind as I moved numbly through my apartment. On my desk sat a stack of travel magazines, my life's work. I'd spent the past decade building a career as a travel writer and photographer, documenting beautiful destinations around the world, helping others create memorable experiences. My eyes fell on an issue from 3 years ago, my feature on Tuscany. The cover showed a sunset over rolling hills dotted with cypress trees, a scene I had photographed during what remained one of the most peaceful, fulfilling weeks of my life. Something stirred inside me, a tiny spark amid the ashes of my hurt. I pulled out my laptop and began researching flights to Italy. It was impulsive, probably foolish, definitely expensive. But with each click, the spark grew stronger. Tuscany in May would be perfect flowers, blooming comfortable temperatures before the crush of summer tourists. I had contacts there from previous assignments. I could rent a small villa, explore areas I hadn't visited before, maybe even pitch a new article to one of my regular publications. By midnight, the idea had fully formed. I would go to Italy, not to crash Jessica's wedding, or create drama, but to reclaim my own joy, to remind myself that I didn't need her approval or inclusion to experience beauty and happiness. I booked a flight leaving in 2 weeks, well before Jessica's wedding date. I found a charming one-bedroom villa in a small town about 30 miles from where her ceremony would take place. I contacted Francesca, a local photographer I'd worked with on my previous trip, to see if she was available for a collaboration. The final piece fell into place when I received an email from Sophia, an editor at Wanderlust magazine, who had published several of my previous pieces. Emma, perfect timing. We have a gap in our August issue. Any chance you're working on something that might fit? We'd need it by end of June. I immediately pitched her an idea that had been forming in my mind: solo celebrations finding joy and meaning in traveling alone. It would be personal drawing on my own experience while offering practical advice and inspiration for others. Sophia loved it. The next morning, I woke up feeling something I hadn't expected: excitement. For the first time since discovering Jessica's wedding plans, I wasn't fixated on what I was being excluded from, but rather what I was creating for myself. I called my parents to inform them of my plans, carefully framing it as a work assignment that happened to be in Italy, making no mention of Jessica's wedding. Their relief was palpable. "That sounds wonderful, honey," my mom said, her voice overly bright. "And it means you won't be alone while we're away." "I'm rarely alone, Mom," I replied with newfound confidence. "I have a life full of experiences and connections. Being by myself isn't the same as being lonely." As I prepared for my trip, I made one firm decision: this journey would not be about spite or showing Jessica what she was missing. It would be about rediscovering my own worth independent of my sister's validation or my parents' comparison. I created a detailed itinerary that included everything I loved: small family-run restaurants, hidden artistic treasures, breathtaking natural landscapes, and connections with local artisans. I booked a cooking class, a wine tasting tour, and arranged to meet with an elderly leather craftsman whose work I had featured in my previous article. When Mia came over to help me pack, she noticed the change in my demeanor. "You seem different," she observed, "more at peace." I considered this as I carefully folded a sundress. I think I've spent so many years trying to fix something that isn't mine to fix. Jessica doesn't want me in her life, at least not in any meaningful way, and that hurts. It will probably always hurt. But I'm done letting that pain define me. Mia hugged me tightly. For what it's worth, she's missing out on knowing an amazing person. The night before my departure, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine watching the city lights. The hurt hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something more complex. A bittersweet acknowledgement that sometimes the family we're born into can't give us what we need, and that's okay. It doesn't diminish our worth or our capacity for joy. My phone buzzed with a text from Francesca in Italy. Weather is perfect, poppies blooming everywhere. Can't wait to create magic with you next week. I smiled, feeling the first genuine excitement I'd experienced in months. In trying to exclude me from her fairy tale, Jessica had inadvertently pushed me toward creating my own. My flight to Florence was a transition space, 10 hours suspended between my life in Boston and whatever awaited me in Italy. I used the time to journal, mapping out not just my itinerary, but my intentions for this journey. This wasn't a vacation. It was a pilgrimage of sorts, a deliberate reclaiming of joy. When we landed, the Tuscan sun was just beginning to bathe the landscape in golden light. I collected my luggage, picked up my rental car, and began the drive to Montepulciano, where I'd rented a small villa on the edge of town. Every mile that passed felt like shedding a layer of heaviness I hadn't realized I was carrying. The villa exceeded my expectations, a stone cottage surrounded by lavender and rosemary bushes, with a terrace overlooking rolling vineyards. The property owner, Eleonora, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked black hair and an infectious laugh, welcomed me with homemade bread, local cheese, and a bottle of her family's wine. "You are here alone?" she asked as she showed me around the cottage. "Yes," I replied, waiting for the familiar look of pity that often followed such admissions. Instead, Eleanora's eyes sparkled. "Brava. The best conversations are sometimes the ones we have with ourselves." She pointed to the terrace. "That is where I come to talk to me after my Enzo passed away 5 years ago. It healed me." Her words felt like permission to be alone without being lonely, to find communion with myself in this beautiful place. My first few days fell into a rhythm that felt both indulgent and healing. Mornings were for exploration, winding drives through cypress-lined roads, visits to small villages perched on hilltops, conversations with locals who were initially curious about the American woman traveling alone, but quickly warmed to my genuine interest in their lives and stories. Afternoons were for work, writing, editing photographs, developing the structure of my article about solo celebrations. The terrace became my office laptop, open beside a glass of local wine, the landscape providing both inspiration and comfort. Evenings were for experiences, a cooking class, where I learned to make authentic peachy pasta by hand, a concert of classical music in a 12th century church, dinners at family restaurants where I was soon greeted by name and ushered to my table. But the real turning point came on my 5th day in Tuscany, when I met Francesca for our planned photography collaboration. We'd arranged to meet at dawn at a poppy field she knew about to capture the flowers in the first light of day. "Emma," she called out, waving as I parked beside her Fiat on a dirt road. Francesca was exactly as I remembered, petite, energetic, with wild curly hair and an artist's observant eyes. We had worked together briefly during my last visit to Tuscany, and I had admired both her talent and her zest for life. We hiked through dewy grass to reach the field, which was even more spectacular than I had imagined. Waves of crimson poppies swaying gently in the morning breeze, backdropped by a medieval town on a distant hill. "It's breathtaking," I whispered, already reaching for my camera. "Wait," Francesca said, touching my arm. "Before we work, I want to try something." She reached into her bag and pulled out a simple white dress. "Put this on." I looked at her in confusion. "I thought we were shooting landscapes." Her smile was mischievous. "The landscape, yes, but also you in the landscape. Trust me." Somewhat self-consciously, I slipped the dress on over my clothes, then removed my jeans and t-shirt underneath. The dress was simple, but beautiful flowing linen that caught the breeze. "Now," Francesca directed, "walk into the poppies. Don't pose. Just be. Feel the sun. Feel the flowers. I will capture you." Initially awkward, I slowly surrendered to the experience. The rising sun warmed my skin. The delicate brush of poppy petals against my legs felt like tiny caresses. I found myself spinning slowly, arms outstretched, face tilted toward the sky, laughing with an unexpected sense of freedom. Francesca moved around me, her camera clicking rapidly, calling out occasional direction, but mostly letting me move naturally. After about 20 minutes, she showed me a few shots on her camera display. I gasped. The woman in those images was radiant hair, catching the sunlight, dress billowing elegantly, surrounded by a sea of red blooms, with an expression of pure, unguarded joy. She looked beautiful, free, and completely at peace. She looked nothing like the hurt, rejected sister I had been just a week ago. "That's really me," I said in wonder. Francesca nodded. "This is the real magic of photography, not capturing how things look, but how they feel. And you, my friend, are feeling joy right now. It shines from within you." After we finished shooting, we had breakfast at a small cafe in the nearby village. Over cappuccinos and cornetti, I found myself telling Francesca about Jessica's wedding and my exclusion from it. When I finished my story, Francesca was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You know what I think? I think your sister has a small heart. Not everyone has the capacity to love generously. Some people's hearts are, how do you say? Ooh, stingy. They have room for only certain people, certain experiences. But you," she tapped my chest, "you have a big heart. You find beauty everywhere. You connect with strangers. You turn pain into creation. This is a gift." Her words resonated deeply. Perhaps the fundamental difference between Jessica and me wasn't about success or achievement or parental favor. Perhaps it was simply about how we experienced the world her circle carefully controlled, an exclusive mine, open and expansive. That evening, back at my villa, I downloaded the photos from our shoot. They were even more stunning on my laptop screen. The colors vibrant, the light ethereal, my expression transformed by genuine happiness. On impulse, I selected my favorite image and posted it to Instagram with a simple caption, "Finding my own joy in the poppy fields of Tuscany, hatch solo celebration." I didn't expect much response. My Instagram was mainly followed by fellow travel writers and friends from home. I closed my laptop and spent the evening on the terrace with Eleonora, who had invited me to share dinner with her. Over homemade gnocchi and local wine, we talked about love loss and the courage it takes to build a life on your own terms. When I checked my phone before bed, I was shocked to see notifications flooding my screen. My poppy field photo had been reposted by a popular travel account, then another and another. Comments were pouring in, hundreds of them, many from women sharing their own stories of finding strength in solitude, of turning rejection into opportunity, of celebrating themselves when others wouldn't. By morning, the photo had gone genuinely viral with thousands of shares and comments. My follower count had quadrupled overnight. My inbox was filled with messages, many deeply personal, from people who found resonance in the image and the simple caption. One message in particular stood out from an Italian wedding dress designer named Allegra. "Your photo embodies everything a bride should feel on her wedding day: joy, freedom, self-love. Would you consider collaborating with me while you're in Tuscany? I'd love to photograph you in one of my designs in your spirit of solo celebration." I sat on my terrace staring at my phone in disbelief. Something that had begun as a personal healing journey was resonating with thousands of people I'd never met. My private act of reclaiming joy had struck a universal chord. After careful consideration, I replied to Allegra, agreeing to meet. What began as personal now felt like it could be something more, a chance to create art that might help others find their own path to celebration with or without traditional milestones or others' validation. As I sipped my morning coffee, watching the sun illuminate the vineyards below, I realized that in trying to exclude me from her carefully curated fairy tale, Jessica had inadvertently led me to create something far more authentic and powerful than I could have imagined. The irony wasn't lost on me in being uninvited to a wedding I had somehow stumbled into, creating a celebration of self that resonated with thousands. My sister's rejection had become the catalyst for an unexpected form of connection with people around the world. I opened my journal and wrote, "Sometimes the most beautiful journeys begin with someone else closing a door." The unexpected viral spread of my poppy field photo transformed my quiet Tuscan retreat into something entirely different. My phone buzzed constantly with notifications, messages, and inquiries. What had begun as a personal healing journey now had an audience, and I felt both exhilarated and exposed. Francesca called me the morning after the photo went viral, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Emma, you are famous. Everyone is talking about the American woman celebrating herself in the poppy fields." I laughed, still unable to fully comprehend what was happening. "It's just one photo, Francesca." "No, no," she insisted. "It is more than a photo. It is a feeling that people recognize. A liberation. You have struck a nerve." She wasn't wrong. As I read through the comments and messages, certain themes emerged repeatedly. Women who felt unseen in their own families. People who had been excluded from important events. Individuals learning to create joy on their own terms. My personal story had tapped into a collective experience of having to rewrite the narratives we're given. My meeting with Allegra, the wedding dress designer, was scheduled for the following day. I drove to her studio in a converted farmhouse outside of Siena, feeling a strange mix of nervousness and anticipation. The building was a beautiful blend of rustic Tuscan architecture and modern design elements, exposed stone walls alongside sleek glass and steel. Allegra greeted me warmly, a striking woman in her 40s with short silver hair and vibrant blue eyes. "Emma, the woman from the poppies. Thank you for coming." Her English was excellent, flavored with a melodic Italian accent. She led me into her studio, where several of her creations were displayed on mannequins. Unlike traditional wedding dresses, Allegra's designs were unconventional, incorporating elements of Italian folklore, modern minimalism, and natural materials. "Your photo captured exactly what I try to express through my designs," she explained, moving among the dresses. "That marriage, the ceremony, the dress, the celebration, these things should not belong only to brides and grooms. They are about marking moments of transformation, of commitment to joy, to life. Why should someone need a partner to claim this kind of celebration?" Her philosophy resonated deeply with me. "That's exactly what I've been thinking about for my article," I told her. "Why we reserve certain celebrations only for traditional milestones, and how we might create meaningful rituals for other important life transitions." Allegra's eyes lit up. "Yes, this is why I wanted to meet you. I have been designing what I call self-commitment dresses, ceremonial garments for women celebrating themselves, their achievements, their healing. Would you consider modeling one for a special shoot, to continue the story you began in the poppy field?" The proposal was unexpected but intriguing. I wasn't a model, but the idea of participating in a visual representation of self-celebration felt right somehow. "What exactly did you have in mind?" I asked. Allegra led me to a sketch pad and turned to a design that took my breath away. A flowing gown in shades of sunrise pink and gold with delicate embroidery featuring Tuscan wildflowers. "I designed this after seeing your photo," she admitted. "Something about your expression, your energy. It inspired me. The dress is nearly complete. We could photograph you at Villa Sedinale. The gardens are magnificent this time of year." It was a surreal moment. A renowned designer had created a dress inspired by my impromptu poppy field photograph. The lines between my personal journey and this creative project were blurring, but in a way that felt meaningful rather than exploitative. "Let's do it," I decided. "But I'd like Francesca to be the photographer. We work well together." Allegra clapped her hands in delight. "Perfect! We will create something beautiful together, the three of us. A celebration of female creativity and self-affirmation." We set the shoot for 3 days later, which gave Allegra time to complete the dress, and Francesca time to secure permission to photograph at Villa Settinale. In the meantime, I continued my exploration of Tuscany, but with a new lens, thinking about celebration, ritual, and transformation. I visited small churches where local women explained traditional festivals honoring female saints. I spoke with an elderly widow who described how she had created her own ceremony on the anniversary of her husband's death, not to mourn, but to honor her own resilience. I interviewed a young female winemaker who had revived ancient Etruscan rituals to mark each harvest. These conversations deepened my understanding of what I was experiencing. that celebrations don't need to follow prescribed formats to be meaningful, that we can create our own ceremonies to mark important transitions. The day of the shoot arrived with perfect weather. Clear skies, gentle breeze, the kind of golden Tuscan light that photographers dream about. Villa Cettinali's gardens were as magnificent as promised symmetrical Italian formal gardens, giving way to wilder woodland areas, ancient statues standing sentinel among precisely trimmed hedges. Allegra had arranged for a local makeup artist and hairstylist to help prepare me. As they worked transforming me into a more polished version of myself, I felt a momentary pang of sadness thinking about Jessica. This was the kind of pre-wedding ritual sisters typically shared. I wondered briefly what she was doing at that moment, if she was preparing for her own ceremony, if she ever thought of me. But as Allegra revealed the finished dress, a masterpiece of flowing fabric and intricate detailing that caught the light with every movement, my focus shifted entirely to the present moment. This wasn't about Jessica anymore. It wasn't even about being excluded from her wedding. It was about creating something new and meaningful from that exclusion. The dress fit perfectly, as if it had been designed for my body, which in a way it had been. As I stepped into the gardens, Francesca gasped and immediately began capturing images. "Move naturally," she directed. "Think about how you felt in the poppy field, but deeper now. You're not just experiencing joy. You're honoring it, celebrating it, committing to it." Something magical happened during that shoot. As I moved through the gardens in Allegra's creation, I felt a profound sense of ritual, as if I were indeed marking a significant life transition. In many ways, I was. This journey had transformed me from someone defined by family rejection to someone creating her own definition of celebration and meaning. Francesca showed me some of the images on her camera display, and I was stunned by what I saw: a woman radiating confidence, joy, and self-possession. If the poppy field photo had captured a moment of spontaneous happiness, these images captured something more intentional, a deliberate claiming of joy as a fundamental right. After the shoot, the three of us, Francesca, Allegra, and I, shared a celebratory dinner in a small restaurant in Siena. As we toasted with local wine, Allegra proposed an idea. "These images are too powerful to keep to ourselves," she said. "I would like to use them to launch a new collection, Celebrations of Self. And I want your story to be part of it, Emma. Your words alongside the images." "It would be like a wedding announcement," Francesca added excitedly, "but announcing your commitment to your own joy, your own path." The idea was bold, unconventional, and perfectly aligned with the journey I'd been on. We spent the evening outlining the concept, a social media campaign, a special section on Allegra's website, potentially even an exhibition combining the photographs with excerpts from my writing about solo celebration. Back at my villa that night, I sat on the terrace under a canopy of stars, still wearing a trace of the makeup from the shoot, feeling the residual magic of the day. I thought about how far I had come from that devastating moment of discovering I wasn't invited to Jessica's wedding. In trying to exclude me from her celebration, my sister had inadvertently pushed me toward creating something more authentic and impactful than I could have imagined. The irony wasn't lost on me. Her carefully orchestrated destination wedding would be a private affair, while my improvised solo celebration was reaching thousands of people with a message of self-affirmation and joy. I opened my laptop and began writing what would become the core of both my magazine article and the text for Allegra's campaign. Some celebrations find us. Others we must create for ourselves. When traditional doors close, we have a choice to knock endlessly, hoping for admission, or to build our own doorways into unexpected joy. As I wrote deep into the night, I felt a sense of purpose and clarity that had been missing for years. What had begun as a reaction to rejection had evolved into something far more powerful, a proactive creation of meaning on my own terms. The path forward was taking shape not in spite of my exclusion from my sister's life, but because of it. Sometimes the most painful rejections lead us exactly where we need to be. The morning after our photo shoot, Francesca sent the first edited images, and they exceeded all expectations. Allegra's sunrise-colored dress seemed to capture the light itself, flowing around me like liquid gold against the backdrop of Villa Settinale's classical gardens. But what struck me most was my own transformation. There was a quiet power in my expression, a serene confidence that I hadn't seen in myself before. We decided to release the images, gradually building a narrative that aligned with Allegra's celebrations of self-concept. Francesca suggested we start with a side-by-side comparison, the spontaneous poppy field photo, next to one of the more formal garden images, with text explaining the journey between these moments. My first draft felt too personal, too raw, detailing Jessica's rejection and my hurt. But as I revised, I realized the most powerful story wasn't about what had been done to me, but what I had created in response. The final version made only passing reference to family circumstances that led to unexpected solo travel, focusing instead on the universal experience of creating meaningful celebration outside traditional frameworks. We posted the comparison with the caption, "From spontaneous joy to intentional celebration." My journey through Tuscany has become an exploration of how we mark life's transitions on our own terms. Collaboration with the visionary at Allegra Designs and brilliant at Francesca Photography hatch celebrations of solo celebration. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The post was shared thousands of times within hours. Comments poured in from people around the world, many sharing their own stories of creating meaningful rituals outside of conventional celebrations. Fashion publications picked up the story. Travel sites featured it. Feminist blogs analyzed it as a statement on women reclaiming celebratory spaces. By evening, my phone was ringing with interview requests from Italian media, then American outlets. A producer from Good Morning America sent an email asking if I would be willing to do a remote segment. My inbox filled with messages from literary agents, suggesting I develop the concept into a book. It was exhilarating and disorienting. I had come to Italy seeking personal healing, and had somehow stumbled into creating a cultural moment. Eleonora found me on the terrace that evening, staring at my phone in disbelief, as notifications continued to flood in. "So," she said with a knowing smile, settling into the chair beside me, "you came to find peace, and instead, you found fame." I laughed, grateful for her grounding presence. "I didn't intend any of this. The most meaningful journeys rarely follow our intended path," she replied, pouring us both a glass of wine. "My Enzo used to say that life is what happens in the space between our plans." Her wisdom helped me refocus. This unexpected attention wasn't about fame, it was about connection. Something in my experience had resonated with people offering a different perspective on celebration, belonging, and self-worth. The next morning, I received a call from Sophia, my editor at Wanderlust magazine. "Emma," she said without preamble, "I've been watching what's happening with your Tuscany photos. This is bigger than the article we discussed. I want to feature you and this entire concept in our cover story. Not just your writing, you personally. Your journey, the photos, the philosophy behind it all." It was an extraordinary opportunity, my first cover story, a chance to shape this narrative intentionally for a large audience. But it also meant becoming more visible than I had ever been, placing myself at the center of the story, rather than observing from behind my camera and notebook. "Can I think about it?" I asked, surprising myself with my hesitation. "Of course," Sophia replied, "but don't think too long. This resonates now because it's authentic and spontaneous. We want to capture that energy." After we hung up, I drove to a small chapel I had discovered earlier in my trip, perched on a hilltop with views across the valley. It was empty, peaceful, a place to think without the constant ping of notifications. As I sat in the cool, quiet interior, I reflected on how dramatically my journey had shifted. I had come to Italy carrying the heavy weight of rejection, seeking solace and healing. Now, I found myself at the center of a conversation about celebration, self-worth, and creating meaning outside traditional frameworks. It wasn't what I had planned, but it felt right, as if the universe had taken my small act of self-care and amplified it into something that might help others. I decided to embrace it fully, to say yes to the cover story, to collaborate with Allegra on the campaign, to share my experience in a way that might offer others permission to create their own celebrations. Over the next week, my days took on a new rhythm. Mornings were for interviews, carefully telling my story in ways that emphasized creation rather than rejection. Afternoons were for writing developing the cover article for Wanderlust crafting text, for Allegra's campaign, responding thoughtfully to some of the most moving messages I'd received. Evenings were still my own quiet dinners, with Eleonora walks through Montepulciano, as the setting sun turned ancient buildings golden moments of reflection on this unexpected turn of events. Allegra organized a small exhibition in her studio, featuring Francesca's photographs alongside excerpts from my writing. The opening night drew an intimate crowd of local artists, designers, and journalists. As I moved through this space, seeing my words and image displayed so beautifully, I felt a profound sense of integration, as if fragmented pieces of myself were finally coming together in a cohesive whole. A week before Jessica's wedding was scheduled to take place, I received my first direct contact from anyone in my family since arriving in Italy. A text from my mother. "Your father and I have seen the photos online. They're beautiful, Emma. Are you still in Italy?" The message was carefully neutral, making no mention of Jessica or the wedding. I replied with equal care. "Yes, still in Tuscany, working on a special project that's taken an unexpected turn. Hope you're well." She didn't respond immediately, and I didn't expect her to. Our family had never been good at addressing emotions directly. 2 days later, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line made my heart skip. From Jessica. I sat on my terrace staring at the notification for several minutes before finding the courage to open it. The message was brief. "I've seen your photos. They're all over social media. You look happy. I hope you are. J." No apology. No explanation for my exclusion from her wedding. No real connection. Just an acknowledgement that she had seen my unexpected public moment and a detached wish for my happiness. After the initial sting faded, I found myself feeling strangely grateful for the message's brevity and distance. It confirmed what I had been slowly accepting throughout this journey, that the close sisterly relationship I had longed for simply wasn't possible with Jessica. At least not now, and for the first time that realization didn't devastate me. I replied with similar brevity, "I am happy, finding my own path. I wish the same for you on your wedding day." It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a step towards something healthier than resentment, a recognition that we were on different paths, and that was okay. The day Jessica was to be married came and went. I spent it intentionally, a special dinner with Francesca and Allegra, celebrating our successful collaboration, rather than dwelling on the celebration I had been excluded from. We toasted to unexpected friendships, to creative passion, to the strange and wonderful ways life unfolds when we remain open to possibility. As our evening ended, Allegra raised a final glass. "To close doors that lead to open skies," she said, her eyes twinkling. It was the perfect encapsulation of my journey. What had begun as a painful exclusion had opened into an expansive new chapter I could never have anticipated. Later that night, alone on my terrace, under a canopy of stars, I reflected on how completely my perspective had shifted. 6 weeks ago, not being invited to Jessica's wedding had felt like the ultimate rejection. Now it felt like a catalyst that had propelled me towards something authentic and meaningful. The viral spread of the photos, the magazine cover, the collaboration with Allegra. These external validations were gratifying, certainly, but the real transformation was internal. I no longer measured my worth against my sister's approval or my parents' comparison. I had found validation in my own joy, my own creative expression, my own definition of celebration. As I watched the moon rise over the Tuscan hills, I felt a sense of profound gratitude, not just for the beauty surrounding me, but for the painful exclusion that had driven me here. Sometimes the most valuable gifts come wrapped in rejection. The greatest fairy tale I was discovering is the one we write for ourselves. 2 weeks after Jessica's wedding day, as my time in Tuscany was drawing to a close, Allegra called with news that would extend my Italian sojourn in ways I never expected. "Emma, the response to our collaboration has been incredible," she exclaimed, her voice bubbling with excitement. "A major Italian fashion magazine wants to feature celebrations of self as their cover story for their September issue. They want new photos, a full editorial spread in different locations across Tuscany. Can you stay longer?" The opportunity was too extraordinary to pass up. I called my landlord in Boston and arranged to extend my apartment sublet. I contacted my regular freelance clients to adjust deadlines. I negotiated with Eleonora to stay in the villa another month. What had begun as a 2-week healing trip had evolved into a 2-month creative residency, with my impromptu solo celebration expanding into something that resonated far beyond my personal experience. The magazine shoot was scheduled across 5 days in multiple locations. The geometric perfection of a Renaissance garden in Florence, the wild beauty of the Val d'Orcia, the otherworldly blue waters of Terme di Saturnia, the medieval streets of San Gimignano, and finally a return to the poppy field where it had all begun. Allegra created 5 new designs for the shoot, each reflecting a different aspect of self-celebration. The white dress for the thermal baths symbolized purification and rebirth. The structured blue gown for the Renaissance garden represented order emerging from chaos. The flowing red creation for the medieval town embodied passion and vitality. The earth tone ensemble for Val d'Orcia connected to groundedness and authenticity. And for the poppy field, a completely reimagined version of the original white dress, now embellished with hand-embroidered poppies, a visual representation of how spontaneous joy could be transformed into intentional celebration. The creative team expanded to include a renowned Italian photographer, a makeup artist who had worked with European royalty, and a stylist from Milan. But Francesca remained involved as a creative consultant, ensuring continuity with our original vision. Throughout the intensive shoot schedule, I was struck by how differently I experienced being photographed now compared to that first spontaneous moment in the poppy field. What had begun as a private act of reclamation had evolved into a collaborative artistic expression with a message that extended beyond my personal story. Between shooting days, I continued developing the Wanderlust cover story, incorporating this new chapter of the journey. Sophia had given me unusual freedom with the piece, allowing me to blend personal narrative with reflective essays on how we mark significant life transitions. One evening, as I worked on the article on my terrace, I received an unexpected call from my father, the first direct contact since I'd left Boston. "Emma," he said, his voice hesitant in a way I wasn't used to hearing, "your mother and I have been following what's happening with your photographs and your writing project." "Oh," I replied, unsure where this was heading. "We're proud of you," he said simply. "This is different from what we expected for your career, but it's clearly meaningful, important even." His words caught me off guard. My parents had always been supportive but reserved about my choice to pursue travel writing rather than a more conventional path. This explicit acknowledgement of the value of my work was new territory. "Thank you, Dad." I managed throat tight with unexpected emotion. "That means a lot." There was a pause, then he cleared his throat. "Your sister's back from her honeymoon. The wedding was nice, small." I could hear the discomfort in his voice, the awareness of the elephant in the room, my conspicuous absence from that nice small wedding. "I'm glad it went well," I said, choosing my words carefully. Another pause. "She saw your photographs, the ones in the garden. She showed them to us." I waited, unsure what response he was looking for. "You look happy, Emma," he finally continued. "Happier than I've seen you look in a long time. Whatever this journey is that you're on, it seems to be the right one for you." It wasn't an apology for allowing Jessica to exclude me. It wasn't even an acknowledgement of how hurtful that exclusion had been. But it was a recognition that my path had value, even if it wasn't what they had envisioned. "I am happy, Dad," I confirmed, in ways I didn't expect when I first came here. "Good," he said, audible relief in his voice that we had navigated this conversation without conflict. "That's good." After we hung up, I sat watching the sunset, contemplating this subtle shift in my relationship with my parents. They might never fully understand my choices or my creative path, but this small acknowledgement felt like a crack in a door that had long been closed. The final day of the magazine shoot brought us full circle back to the poppy field, where Francesca had first photographed me in the simple white dress. The flowers were still in bloom, though less abundant now as summer approached. As I stood among them in Allegra's elaborately embroidered creation, I was struck by how perfectly this location embodied my journey returning to the site of spontaneous joy, with a deeper appreciation, a more intentional presence. The magazine's creative director, who had joined us for this final shoot, watched thoughtfully as the photographer captured images from different angles. "You know what makes these photographs so compelling," she observed. "It's that you're not pretending. So many fashion editorials feature models playing a role acting out a fantasy, but you're genuinely celebrating yourself. It's authentic." Her comment crystallized something I had been feeling throughout this experience. The power of this project came from its honesty. What had begun as a genuine need to reclaim joy in the face of rejection had maintained its integrity, even as it evolved into something more polished and public. After the final shot, as the team packed up equipment and exchanged contact information, I walked alone to a quiet spot at the edge of the poppy field. Looking out over the Tuscan landscape that had become so meaningful to me, I reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought me here. Jessica's wedding invitation, the one never meant for me, had arrived exactly 2 months ago. At the time, it had felt like confirmation of a painful truth that I was unwanted, unworthy of inclusion in my sister's important moment. Now that rejection seemed like a gift, the catalyst that had pushed me to create something authentic and meaningful on my own terms. The following week brought the conclusion of several threads that had woven through my Tuscan sojourn. The magazine editorial was completed. The Wanderlust article was submitted for final edits. Allegra's Celebrations of Self collection was officially announced, with our collaboration featured prominently in the press release. My final evening in the villa, Eleonora insisted on hosting a small gathering, just the key people who had been part of this unexpected journey. Francesca arrived with her partner Allegra, came with her assistant, and a few local friends I had made during my stay completed the intimate circle. Under the stars, with the Tuscan hills silhouetted against the night sky, we shared a meal of local specialties prepared by Eleonora. The conversation flowed easily between Italian and English, punctuated by laughter and the clinking of wine glasses. As the evening drew to a close, Allegra raised her glass for a toast. To Emma, who came to Tuscany looking for healing and found a movement instead. "You have reminded us all that celebration is not just for conventional milestones. It is for moments of personal transformation, for claiming joy on our own terms." To Emma, the others echoed, glasses raised. Deeply moved, I struggled to find adequate words to express what this experience had meant to me. "I came here carrying rejection," I finally said, "and you all helped me transform it into something beautiful and meaningful. I will never forget that gift." Later, as the guests departed with warm embraces and promises to stay connected, Eleonora walked with me to my terrace for a final moment together. "When you first arrived," she said, "you had the look of someone who believed they were not enough. Now you have the look of someone who knows exactly how much they are worth." Her observation touched the heart of my transformation. This journey had fundamentally altered how I valued myself, no longer seeking validation through inclusion in other celebrations, but creating meaningful celebration on my own terms. As I packed my bags the next morning, preparing for my return to Boston, I realized that I was bringing home something far more valuable than viral photographs or a magazine cover story. I was bringing home a profound understanding of my own capacity for joy, creativity, and resilience, a understanding that no exclusion or rejection could diminish. My phone buzzed with a text message as I was loading my car. It was from Jessica, only the second communication since I had been in Italy. "Saw the magazine preview. Impressive. When are you back?" Brief, still emotionally distant, but perhaps the smallest opening toward reconnection. I typed a similarly concise reply. "Tomorrow, coffee next week." Her response came quickly. "Okay." It wasn't emotional reconciliation. It wasn't an apology or an explanation. But it was a step, a small one, toward whatever our relationship might become in this new chapter, where I no longer desperately sought her approval or inclusion. As I drove away from the villa that had been my home during this extraordinary period of transformation, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: gratitude for the unexpected journey, pride in what had been created, curiosity about what would come next, and yes, a touch of sadness at leaving this magical place. But unlike when I had arrived broken by rejection and seeking escape, I was now leaving whole carrying not just memories and accomplishments, but a profound understanding that sometimes the most beautiful celebrations are the ones we create for ourselves when others close their doors. The fairy tale I had created in Italy wasn't about a perfect wedding or family harmony. It was about something far more powerful, the discovery that joy doesn't require invitation or permission. It simply requires the courage to claim it as your own. Returning to Boston felt like stepping into a different world. My apartment, which had once seemed like a perfectly adequate space, now felt confined after the expansiveness of the Tuscan countryside and the soaring ceilings of my Italian villa. The city noise, which I had barely noticed before, now registered as a constant intrusion after weeks of cicada songs and gentle vineyard breezes. But the most significant difference was in how people responded to me. News of my Italian solo celebration had preceded my return, creating a strange new dynamic with friends, colleagues, and acquaintances. People I barely knew approached me in coffee shops to share how my story had inspired them. Editors who had previously ignored my pitches now eagerly sought my contributions. Social invitations flooded my inbox. "It's like you've become a minor celebrity," Mia observed over our reunion lunch the day after my return. "How does it feel?" I considered her question carefully. "Surreal," I finally answered. "And a little ironic. I went to Italy because I was excluded from an important celebration. Now people are celebrating me for celebrating myself." The most immediate practical impact was on my career. The Wanderlust cover story, published just days after my return, received an enthusiastic response, leading to a flurry of new assignments. The Italian fashion magazine's September issue, featuring the Celebrations of Self editorial, was generating significant pre-publication buzz. 3 literary agents had made serious inquiries about a potential book exploring the concept of self-celebration through travel and personal ritual. My previously modest freelance writing career had suddenly expanded into something with genuine momentum and unexpected creative directions. It was exciting, but also overwhelming, requiring careful consideration about which opportunities aligned with my authentic voice and which might pull me away from the values at the core of my Tuscan transformation. The meeting with Jessica loomed large in my mind. We had arranged to meet at a neutral location, a cafe midway between our respective apartments on a Tuesday morning when it would likely be quiet. I arrived early, choosing a table in the corner that offered some privacy. When Jessica walked in, I was struck by how unchanged she appeared, the same perfectly styled hair, immaculate business attire, composed expression. Yet something felt different in how I perceived her. The aura of superiority that had always seemed to surround her, or perhaps that I had projected onto her, was diminished somehow. "Emma." She greeted me with a slight nod, setting her designer handbag on the empty chair beside her. "Jessica," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Congratulations on your wedding." "Thank you." She ordered a non-fat latte from the hovering server before continuing. "Your project in Italy seems to have been successful." It wasn't quite a compliment, but it wasn't dismissive either, more an acknowledgement of something she couldn't quite categorize. "It was never intended to be a project," I explained. "It began as a personal journey that resonated with others in unexpected ways." Jessica nodded slightly, her expression unreadable. A tense silence stretched between us until her coffee arrived. After taking a careful sip, she finally spoke again. "Mom and Dad think I should explain why you weren't invited to the wedding." I felt a flicker of the old hurt, quickly followed by the newer, stronger sense of self I had cultivated in Tuscany. "You don't owe me an explanation, Jessica. Your wedding was your celebration to share with whoever you chose." She looked momentarily taken aback by my response, perhaps expecting the wounded, approval-seeking sister she was accustomed to. "Nevertheless," she continued, setting down her cup with precision, "I think it's important to clear the air." I waited, genuinely curious about what rationale she would offer. "Andrew and I wanted a very specific aesthetic for our wedding," she began, her tone measured. Every element was carefully curated to create a particular atmosphere. The guest list was part of that curation. It was such an unexpectedly honest admission of superficiality that I almost laughed. My exclusion hadn't been about some deep emotional rift or unforgivable past conflict. It had been about aesthetic curation, as if I were a mismatched table setting. I see, I said, simply, finding no anger in my response, only a strange sense of clarity. You've always been so, independent. Jessica continued, seeming determined to justify her decision. So different from the rest of us. Your career choices, your lifestyle, your perspective, they've never aligned with the family image. As she spoke, I realized she was giving me a profound gift, the truth I had been seeking for years. In her eyes, my greatest flaw was precisely what had become my greatest strength, my unwillingness to conform to predetermined expectations. You're right, I agreed, surprising her again. I am different, and I'm grateful for that difference, especially now. Jessica studied me with new interest. You've changed. Yes, I acknowledged. Italy changed me. Or rather, what happened in Italy helped me recognize my own value independent of others' approval, including yours. She flinched slightly at this directness, but didn't look away. The photographs are beautiful. She offered the closest thing to a compliment she seemed capable of giving. Andrew's mother couldn't stop talking about them when she saw them online. Ironically, the Andersons from your building couldn't attend our wedding after all last-minute conflict. This small detail that the neighbors who had received an invitation meant for me hadn't even attended struck me as both absurd and strangely perfect, a fitting conclusion to the series of events that had led me to Tuscany. Life rarely goes according to perfect plans. I observed thinking of Eleonora's wisdom about the space between our intentions. For the first time, a hint of genuine emotion crossed Jessica's carefully composed features. No, she agreed softly. It doesn't. We didn't achieve dramatic reconciliation during that coffee meeting. There were no tears, no heartfelt apologies, no promises to rebuild our relationship. But there was something else, a new clarity about the nature of our connection and its limitations. Jessica would never be the supportive, emotionally available sister I had longed for, and I would never be the conventional, conforming sister she seemed to want. But perhaps we could build something different, a more honest relationship based on accepting these truths rather than fighting against them. As we prepared to leave, Jessica hesitated, then asked, "Will you be at Thanksgiving this year?" It was a small opening, tentative and conditional, but an opening nonetheless. Yes, I decided. I'll be there. In the weeks that followed, my new life continued to unfold in unexpected directions. The Italian magazine was published to significant acclaim. Allegra's Celebrations of Self collection launched with a successful showing during Milan Fashion Week. My agent, I had chosen one of the three who approached me, secured a book deal for what would become Uninvited, Finding Celebration on Your Own Terms. Part travel memoir, part philosophical exploration of creating meaningful personal rituals. I began planning my next solo journey, this time to Japan, to explore traditional ceremonies marking personal transitions outside of marriage and parenthood. The assignment came from a prestigious travel publication that had previously ignored my queries with a budget generous enough to allow for extended cultural immersion. My parents and I established a new, more authentic relationship. Not perfect, still sometimes awkward, but built on a growing acceptance of who I actually was, rather than who they had expected me to be. They displayed a framed copy of my Wanderlust cover in their living room, a small but meaningful gesture of recognition. As for Jessica and me, we maintained a cautious, limited connection. Our relationship would never have the closeness I had once craved, but it had something it had previously lacked: honesty about its boundaries and limitations. 6 months after my return from Italy, I received an unexpected package at my apartment. Inside was a beautifully bound album containing prints of all the photographs from the Italian shoots, the spontaneous poppy field image, the Villa Settinale series in Allegra's dress, and the fashion magazine editorial. A handwritten note from Francesca accompanied the gift, for Emma, who reminded us all that the most beautiful celebrations are the ones we create for ourselves, with love and gratitude for the journey we shared. Paging through the album that evening, I was struck by the visual documentation of my transformation from the raw, unguarded joy of that first poppy field image to the serene confidence of the final photographs. It wasn't just my surroundings or attire that had evolved, but something fundamental in my expression, my posture, my presence. I placed the album on my coffee table, a tangible reminder of how rejection can sometimes be the beginning rather than the end of a story. My sister's wedding invitation, the one never meant for me, had set in motion a journey that led to something far more authentic and meaningful than I could have imagined. Being uninvited had become the greatest invitation of my life, to create celebration on my own terms, to define worth through my own lens, to discover that sometimes the most beautiful fairy tales are the ones we write for ourselves. Have you ever created your own celebration after being excluded from someone else's? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey of turning rejection into something beautiful resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who might need this message today. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey of self-discovery and celebration. Remember, your joy doesn't require anyone else's invitation. It's yours to claim whenever you're ready.